For 378 days, Ukraine stands strong against the forces of the Russian invasion. In his evening video address dedicated to the International Women's Day, President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked all women who work, study, rescue, treat and fight for Ukraine. He stressed that it is important to remember those who gave their lives for the country. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Russian troops would have an open road to capture key cities in eastern Ukraine if they seize control of Bakhmut, reports Interfax Ukraine. In an interview with CNN, Zelensky defended his decision to keep Ukrainian forces in the almost besieged city. He said that after Bakhmut, Russians could go further to Kramatorsk, to Sloviansk, to other cities in Ukraine. The president said that Russia wants to achieve at least some victory, a small victory, even by ruining everything in Bakhmut, just killing every civilian there. He said that if Russia is able to put their little flag on top of Bakhmut, it would help mobilize their society in order to create this idea that they are such a powerful army. Earlier, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the Ukrainian defenses of Bakhmut could be defeated in the coming days, but it would not necessarily be a turning point in the war. The US intelligence community believes that Russia currently lacks the ammunition and troops to make significant territorial gains in Ukraine in 2023. So it may shift to a strategy of holding and defending existing positions, prolonging the war, informs European Pravda based on the report by the New York Times. According to the director of the US National Intelligence, Avril Haines, Russia may choose to continue the war in Ukraine, even if it means long pauses in offensive actions, as the best chance to achieve its strategic goals. Haines also said that in addition to troops losses, Russia is facing critical morale problems and ammunition shortages. If Russia does not initiate mandatory mobilization and does not get significant supplies of munitions from third countries, it will be increasingly difficult for it to maintain the current level of offensive operations in the coming months. As a result, Russian forces can completely switch to holding and defending the territories they occupied. The EU ambassadors approved additional €2 billion to the European Peace Fund, reports Radio Liberty. The European Peace Fund is designed to assist member states in their arms supplies to Ukraine. According to the Swedish presidency of the EU Council, this decision sends a clear signal of the EU's enduring commitment to military support for Ukraine and other partners. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said that Ukraine needs 1 million artillery shells, which is likely to require about €4 billion, reports Militarny. At an informal meeting with EU defense ministers in Sweden, Reznikov said that another priorities are air defense systems and more tanks. According to him, with all that, Ukraine will be ready for a counteroffensive. The minister stressed that time saves lives, so decisions should be made as soon as possible. Oleksiy Reznikov stated that Ukraine is not involved in the explosions on the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, reports Interfax Ukraine. At an informal meeting with EU defense ministers in Sweden, the Ukrainian defense minister said that this whole story is strange and the official investigation will reveal all the details. This is like a compliment for our special forces, but these are not our actions, said Reznikov. This way he responded to the recent publication by the New York Times linking last year's Nord Stream gas pipeline explosions to pro-Ukrainian forces. However, the article says they have no evidence that the leadership of Ukraine was involved in the operation or that the perpetrators acted on the instructions of any Ukrainian officials. At the same time, it is reported that it is only known that the perpetrators of the explosion were allegedly opponents of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In September 2022, as a result of an explosion, 2 lines of Nord Stream 1 and 1 of Nord Stream 2 were depressurized near the Danish island of Bornholm. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that Leopard 2 main battle tanks from Germany and Portugal will be delivered to the Ukrainian armed forces by the end of March, reports Interfax Ukraine. Pistorius clarified that he meant 18 German Leopard 2 A6 tanks and 3 Portuguese tanks. He said the tanks will arrive with trained crews, which will allow them to immediately go to the combat zone. Meanwhile, Germany has delivered another batch of military assistance to Ukraine, including 2 Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. According to the information published on the website of the German government, Berlin also sent to Kyiv circa 6,000 rounds of ammunition. This raises the total number of Gepard guns delivered to Ukraine to 34. The package of assistance also includes 2 border protection vehicles and 6 mobile antenna mast systems. On top of that, 13 breech lane tanks Beaver and 500 pistols SFP-9 are being prepared for transportation or have been delivered to Ukraine. If you like what we do and would like to tip us, you can now do so directly to our PayPal. Check out the link in the description to this episode for more details. And as usual, you can subscribe to our Patreon.
And you heard him. For whom? For what are they fighting? In a sense, it is astonishing to hear that, right? That group of men and saying that to their commander, telling him that they'd rather sit behind bars for 10 years than fight on the front lines. Making it clear they don't know who they're fighting for. Not for Putin. A fight that has become so brutal and so bloody that now, for some men on the Russian front lines, it is driving them to suicide. It's a horrible moment. And here again, those Russian soldiers.
Like yesterday, a guy went outside, sat on the bench, put a gun to his head, and blew his brains out. He was walking saying, "I'm sick of it, and got on his knees. We heard the shot at 4 a.m.
It's hard to hear, but it's important to hear. These men, human beings, being forced to fight on the front lines. It does provide important insight into the mindset of the Russians who are fighting. And it comes as we have new drone video of the fight for Bakhmut. You can see fires burning in the distance there of that video. Ukraine claims it killed more than 100 Russian soldiers there in just the past 24 hours. That's what the Russians are dealing with, 100 dead in a day. And inside Bakhmut, the war of words over who is in control is now in full swing. Wagner's boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, today claiming his men control the eastern part of the city. But Zelensky's number 2 general showed up in Bakhmut as well today, his 3rd visit to the city in less than a week. And Ukraine released this new video of soldiers, they say, freely driving through the city of Bakhmut. We've geolocated this, playing music, storefronts shattered, apartments decimated. They're driving through playing music, an incongruous and odd thing. It also appears a vital Ukrainian supply line to Bakhmut has been repaired. Now, this is a temporary bridge you're looking at into the city. That bridge had been destroyed. It means Ukraine no longer has to rely on one dangerous dirt road that we had showed you yesterday. They were able to fix that bridge that the Russians had blown out. That is another setback for Putin in a months-long battle that Russia expected to last just a couple of weeks. And coming up, you're going to hear from someone who has been a thorn in Putin's side for years. I just spoke to Nadia Tolokonnikova, a member of the punk group Pussy Riot, which has long protested Putin's regime. She was jailed for 21 months in Russia just for criticizing Putin. And you're going to hear what she has to say to Russians now. But first, Fred Pleiken is live in Moscow to begin our coverage. And Fred, how is Putin talking about the fight tonight?
Well, certainly, if you look at Russian state-run media and you look at some of Putin's top generals, Aaron, the Russians do believe that they have a little bit of momentum going on the battlefield. However, today, once again, Vladimir Putin said Russia is under attack. He said specifically under attack from the West. And to Russia, on International Women's Day, he also said that for him, it's important that Russia's women become part of that battle as well. Here's what we're learning.
Devastating assault on Ukraine with losses on both sides mounting. It's all hearts and flowers in Moscow. Russia celebrating International Women's Day. Many of the women willing to speak to us saying they would make the ultimate sacrifice, sending their boys to fight.
If there's no other way, yes, I would send my son and go myself if declared fit.
We collect money for drones, do what we can, and we want our boys to win.
I support President Putin. He does everything right. Good man. We love him.
And the Russian president is publicly trying to show his love for Russia's women, handing out medals and warning more sacrifices will be necessary.
Now that Russia is again facing direct threats to its security and sovereignty, we see many examples of bravery and determination, courage, a willingness to defend the truth, protect people, and the very future of our state itself, the future that we ourselves need.
On the front lines, the going remains tough. The Ukrainians say they've killed scores of Russians in the past day alone around the embattled city Bakhmut. That's where the Wagner private military company is unleashing its cannons on Ukraine's defenses. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin talking to his own mercenaries about what he says is a lack of ammo hindering further advances.
How are you managing now when you are almost using more ammunition than you receive?
The guys from another regiment helped us out. They brought a day worth of ammunition. Only that saved the day. When we have more, we help them out.
Prigozhin claims Wagner is now in control of all of eastern Bakhmut and claims Russia's true power will soon be unleashed.
The world is yet to face a fully prepared Russian army with units not yet engaged in combat, with all the possible state-of-the-art weapons and reconnaissance tools. Perfectly trained, they are biding their time until Wagner opens the operational space for them after Bakhmut.
But the Ukrainians say they will stand and fight in Bakhmut, and many more Russian women might find their husbands and sons going to battle as the war drags on.
And Aaron, tonight the Ukrainians are admitting that the Russians have made some advances in Bakhmut. However, you were mentioning that Ukraine's second highest general was in Bakhmut for the third time in a week. And he said that by and large, the defenses there are holding. He's saying that they're trying to force the Russians to make errors to try and turn the tide there in Bakhmut, which of course has become such an important battle, Aaron.
Absolutely. All right, Fred, thank you very much. And out front now, let's go to the retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, the former commanding general of Europe and the 7th Army. And General, you just heard Yevgeny Prigozhin saying Wagner's in control of all of eastern Bakhmut. That's his claim. But then in that same portion, he talks about this lack of ammunition and how that's hurting further advances. And he just keeps complaining about this issue of ammunition. What do you think is happening here?
He is trying to publicize the fact that he's not getting what he wants, Aaron. This is the continued personality clash between Putin and Prigozhin and others. When you're in a situation where you're having to ask prisoners to come back to the fight, where you're having what the U.S. Army calls a sensing session, and that was one of the most bizarre ones I've ever seen at the beginning of your clips, where the soldiers are basically refusing to go into the fight and would rather go back to jail. Yeah. You know you have trouble. And then when you have someone standing in front of a statue saying, hey, just wait, the real Russian army's coming. The real Russian army has not come. They're not trained to standard. They're not going to be there in full force anytime since they haven't been there in the last 13 months. And whereas I don't have any precise intelligence of what is happening in Bakhmut, this has been going on for 7 months. Yeah. And Ukraine has continued to hold that city. And as you showed in the one clip with Ukrainian soldiers driving through the town, seemingly in control, the Russian military might be able to take elements of the city, but they can't hold it. It's one thing to attack. It's another thing to hold on to what you've secured.
Absolutely. And I want to play for you something else Prigozhin said today. Let me just, so you can hear it for yourself.
The world is yet to face a fully prepared Russian army with units not yet engaged in combat, with all the possible state-of-the-art weapons and reconnaissance tools. Perfectly trained, they are biding their time until Wagner opens the operational space for them after Bakhmut.
Perfectly trained, they are biding their time. Is there anything to that, or is that a total load of BS?
Yeah, I'll just say Prigozhin is a friggin' idiot, Aaron. I'm sorry for being that gross and that direct. But the kind of comments he's making, he is not a soldier. He's not a commander. He dresses up like one. He doesn't understand leadership or morale or maneuver warfare. And to stand up in this place saying everything's going to be fine, we're biding our time. But at the same time, another film has him saying we don't have enough ammo. And in another film, he's saying we're using prisoners. And, it just seems ridiculous. The guy is a joke.
It certainly does seem bizarre to put all those things together. All right, General Hertling, thank you as always. Out front now, Nadia Tolokonnikova. She is a Russian activist and member of Pussy Riot who was jailed for 21 months in Russia for criticizing Putin. They called it hooliganism. Russia recently opened another criminal trial against her, another case in response to an art show that included burning a portrait of Putin. So, Nadia, I really appreciate your time. And, you hear some of these Russian women in that report that we just played saying, one of them says, I support President Putin. He does everything right. Good man. we love him. Is this the view of most Russians even now?
I highly doubt it. It's really difficult to measure what the public actually thinks about Putin because it's incredibly costly to criticize him. We see a lot of dozens of political prisoners in Russia, and they're appearing every day. People are getting 8 years for pushing like button on Instagram. And it makes it incredibly dangerous for people to say something against Putin. There was a case recently where a 11-year-old girl made a drawing with the Ukrainian flag, and she's currently in foster care, and her dad is under arrest.
Foster care and her father under arrest.
Exactly.
11 years old.
11 years old.
It's terrifying. I mean, that brings it home. You know, because you spent almost 2 years in a Russian prison, what happens when you cross Putin in any way.
Yeah.
What risks are people taking now? Speak out.
They can be arrested. Their family members can be arrested. They can be murdered as Boris Nemtsov or two other friends of mine who died because they were criticizing Putin and his regime. It's not something that I would advise people to do, to go openly against the war of Vladimir Putin, or at least if they are in Russia currently. They can make this choice for themselves, but I wouldn't advise it because I don't think it's worth to risk your life and life of your relatives. That's why whenever Russians are being criticized for not doing enough, I feel for them because a lot of people I know, they have to stay in Russia. They don't have voice. They simply cannot speak out against the regime because it became just incredibly dangerous. And they also cannot leave the country because not everyone is privileged enough to be able to leave the country and start a new life somewhere else.
How bad is it being in prison in Russia? I mean, you sit here, you spent 21 months away from a child that you had, and you had to serve that time. It's really a hell on earth, especially when you're being moved to the penal colony, where you have to work by law. You have to work, and it's practically slave labor. Luckily, I was able to fight against the system, and years later, after I got out of jail, my ex-prison boss, was sentenced for organizing a system of slave labor in a penal colony where I served my time. I was forced to sew police uniforms and military uniforms. So these days, people who oppose Putin and who say something against the war, they're being sent to colonies to produce military uniforms.